Hi friends, welcome to episode number 4 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for 11 years and counting, I found myself asking the question, where's the podcast that'll help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I did want to explain the gap in episodes. Last weekend was spent preparing for a tech conference called Google Fest. This year, the convention was held in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I presented a session for the first time. My session was all about Google Drawings and how it is incredibly versatile and my go-to tool for creating just about everything I need for my library program. While I'm not a tech instructor, nor am I Google certified in anything, I drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and I function nearly 100% using the Google platform. I foresee a Google Tools for Librarians episode in the future. And I've considered working towards a Google Certified Instructor distinction. For now, I've decided that dedicating time to becoming a Google Certified trainer or educator or innovator won't drastically impact how I do my job, but investing in this podcast does. The decision was an easy one. Before we dive into today's topic, a wonderful friend who was incredibly supportive in the planning stages of this podcast sent me a great article from bookriot.com. Author and librarian Sarah Ullery posted on September 17, 2018, "Librarians must weed their book collection." I will attach a link in the show notes. She mentioned many similar reasons for weeding, as was mentioned in our episode number 1, including removing non-circulating materials and replacing worn-out popular books and much-loved classics with fresh copies. Sarah Ullery did make an excellent point, which I missed completely. Weeding our collections gives us the perfect opportunity to diversify our collection. She writes, I quote, "What I'm saying is this. As librarians, we have a responsibility to our community. If we continue to keep the same kind of books on the shelves and make assumptions about what people will and won't read, we are responsible for the ignorance we have allowed to fester within our community. If we assume LGBTQ books will offend people, so we don't buy them, recommend them, or display them, we have become the problem. We are librarians for all members of our community, not just the majority. It is our responsibility to buy books from different genres and by authors of different backgrounds so we can reach patrons we have neglected because we have been stuck doing and buying the same things for so many years." End quote. Understandably, she writes from the perspective of a public librarian. However, school librarians at all levels share this obligation to ensure diversity in our collection regardless of our patrons' ages. Interestingly, Sarah Ullery also posted another article on September 23, 2018, titled, "The House with a Clock in Its Walls, Read It, Then Watch It." I am very amused at the timing because I nearly weeded all of my John Bellairs books which hadn't circulated in the last 5 years in the library I currently work. Now, with all the buzz of excitement and the new movie which is showing in theaters, starring Jack Black and Cate Blanchett, my lone copy is in constant circulation, and I have more than 5 copies being sent over from other libraries. This is also a wonderful example of don't judge a book by its cover, as my one copy of this book is ancient and the cover art is very dated, but students are clamoring to get their hands on a book for themselves. And now, join me as we tackle the issue of Book Warden, Truth Hurts. This episode was inspired by 2 related things which happened in the middle of July. I was on Twitter when I came across a picture taken at Scholastic's Reading Summit and was posted by Donalyn Miller. This picture was of a slide from a presentation given by Annie Ward, co-author with Stephanie Harvey, of the book From Striving to Thriving, How to Grow Capable, Confident Readers. I will confess I have yet to read the book, although it is certainly on my reading list, which isn't getting any shorter, thanks to the research I do for my podcast. This slide was titled Book Warden, and it listed 5 ways in which adults limit students' reading. And the very first way is to, quote, confine kids to the just right books. I will attach an image in the episode notes. Without the benefit of reading the book or being in attendance at the reading summit, I have no way of knowing if the term book warden was originally intended to apply to school teachers, school librarians, public librarians, parents, or all of them. And quite honestly, it doesn't matter. Message received. The post created a flurry of Twitter responses, and I'll admit it put me on the defensive and left me second-guessing a great deal of my past interactions with my students and library policies and procedures during our book checkout. When was the last time you stumbled across a Twitter discussion that you regret seeing? Because it happened to be the summer, and getting a good night's sleep is less critical than perhaps during the school year, I found myself reading some of the Twitter fallout from people sharing memories of when they were discouraged from reading. Posts such as, quote, I remember this dumb librarian wouldn't let me check out a book I wanted, end quote, and, quote, this dumb librarian in my school told me I couldn't read a chapter book and I was only allowed to get a picture book, end quote. A few weeks later, I was catching up on one of my favorite podcasts, and I listened to episode number 55 of Books Between Podcast with Corrina Allen, and I stopped in my tracks. She dedicated the first half of her episode to responding to the message of the Book Warden slide. I've elected to split this topic into 2 episodes, today's Book Warden, Truth Hurts, and the follow-up episode, Book Snob, Guilty as Charged. Corrina Allen is a 5th grade teacher, and in addition to sharing book recommendations for middle grade students, she also conducts fascinating interviews with authors of these books. She reflects on the book warden as watching over a classroom library, which shares many of the same challenges, albeit on a different scale, as the school library. She coined the term book witch and reflected on her own experiences with her students over the years. I highly recommend the Books Between podcasts. Her insight and perspective has been extremely valuable, and I always end up adding more books to my must-buy list after listening to her episodes. I'll include a link to her podcast in the show notes. The image of the library books being under lock and key and an unforgiving gatekeeper who restricts which books a student can check out calls into question the role school librarians play when classes come to visit the library. I want to be like Willy Wonka when he opens the doors to his chocolate factory, and have my arms open wide and invite my students to help themselves to whichever books make them happy. The reality is I probably more resemble a tour guide, pointing in all directions to the different sections of the library for my students to explore. I can't guarantee that someday students who visit my school library will have carte blanche to check out all the books they'd like. I believe that a compromise needs to be reached. School librarians have to strike a balance while supporting student choice and foster their love of reading, while encouraging students to find materials which are both appropriate in reading level and content. We also have to acknowledge that our collection isn't limitless. When I can, I buy books in pairs so students can buddy read, but it is unusual to have more than 2 copies of even our most popular titles. Let me preface this by saying, I'm an elementary school librarian. I will make an attempt to make my podcast as applicable to as many teaching scenarios as possible, and when I get my act together and figure out how to conduct interviews, but today is not that day, I plan to bring middle and high school librarians into the conversation. When I introduce my students to our school library in September, I oftentimes use the analogy of a grocery store. It helps that my younger students refer to shopping for a book when their class visits our library. We talk about how they don't have to like everything they see in a grocery store, and not everything sold at a grocery store is intended for them. I suggest that a grocery store sells diapers and baby food, And some students mention they don't eat meat or they have food allergies. And then even some older students who will point out that stores sell wine and they're too young for wine. I make sure that they all remember there is something for everyone at a grocery store, and the same is true at their school library. I do teach students how to find the just right book. In fact, like many elementary librarians, I read Goldie Socks and the Three Librarians by Hopkins. We practice the 5-finger rule because the teachers in my building model and encourage that strategy in their classrooms. And it isn't unusual when my students return their library books that they leave the 5-finger rule bookmark, oftentimes laminated and generated by their classroom teacher, in their books. Moreover, my library curriculum includes this very skill for several grade levels. I teach lessons to my students in the middle, second, and third grade because, being in the middle, approximately half of our collection is on the easy side, and the other half is more challenging. They need help finding books which are both manageable and challenge them to be ready for the next grade. So, am I a book warden, a book witch, or a gatekeeper because I encourage students to read books that they themselves have the capacity to read? I'm rapidly coming to that conclusion. I am guilty of asking students to read a sentence, just a sentence, mind you, to see if we are even in the ballpark when checking out books. In my defense, I have to factor many dueling considerations. I have worked in buildings where teachers have reminded their students of their F&P levels before they come up to check out the books. And no, none of my books have F&P levels, but I have seen this done in the classroom libraries, which, by the way, is definitely an episode currently in the works. I even remember pulling books because I was told ahead of time by our reading specialist who requested books leveled J, K, and L for a particular student who was coming to the library that afternoon. Oftentimes, an ambitious reader will request a book that their parents or older sibling can read to them. And I have many students who want to buddy read whatever book their best friend just selected from the shelf. This goes to the belief I have that students carry library books around much like one would wear an accessory. It's a status symbol. Adults might well carry a book as a conversation starter, but students, I feel, are more interested in giving the appearance of being a strong reader. I have some students whose birthdays are such that they are nearly a full year older than their classmates. These students will accumulate copycats and a following as they move around the chapter book section and pick out the books they can read, but not necessarily their classmates. I also have teachers who expect students to start reading their library books as soon as they return to class. And I have other teachers who insist the library books go home so as not to become lost in a classroom library collection. I have parents who email me critiquing their book their child recently brought home, that it was too easy, it was too hard, it was not a quality read, or it was too scary, and it causes nightmares. I have had parents who have asked that I review their child's selection before it goes home each week, and I have had parents who preferred their child select whatever interests them. I have kindergartners asking for Harry Potter and 5th graders clamoring for David Shannon's No David because he streaks naked down the street. Does it make me a warden because I have checkout limits when students come to the library? It does. I've read of school libraries, not many mind you, with a 10-book limit per student. I can think of so many reasons why this is untenable, not the least of which that my libraries are on the 3rd floor of our school, and I cannot imagine a 6-year-old making it down safely while carrying 10 books in their arms. So am I a book warden if I question a student's selection when checking out 2 Harry Potter books on Monday, knowing the student will be back on Friday, not even having made a dent in the first, let alone the second book? Sure, the library only has so many copies, and I want to have enough for the other students. I'm also dealing with the reality that our book checkout is every 4 days. We have a 4-day special schedule, and I am one of the rotated specials, which provides shared planning time for all the teachers. And if I question a student who keeps renewing the same book week after week after week with no evidence of making progress, so that same student can spend library time chatting behind a bookcase, does that make me a book warden? Yes, it does, because I know students who are waiting to read that very same book. And if I encourage a student to try something new after weeks and weeks of checking out books from the same shelf, am I a book warden? Possibly. I'd like to think that I'm helping a student discover something new and interesting, in the same way a waiter might suggest something special on the menu. And am I a book warden because students are invited to read Where's Waldo books in the library, but those books aren't circulated? Yes, I am. Am I complicit because I supported the Accelerator Reading Program in my first school library for several years? Yes, I am. P.S. Look for an upcoming episode on leveled readers. And because I keep our non-circulating copies of the Guinness Book of World Records and Ripley's Believe It or Not at a table for students who finish checking out or who can't check out because they left their books at home, does that make me a book warden? Yep, I'm a book warden. So, am I a book warden if I don't purchase books that are intended for older middle school or high school students because the resulting concerned parent emails would crash my computer? Yes, I am. And by the same token, when my 4th and 5th graders ask for upper middle and YA fiction, I always explain that while our library doesn't have those titles, their middle school will, and I even demonstrate using the online card catalog which public library branch has the available copies that day. I encourage them to talk to their parents about the books they'd like to read. It is also appropriate to mention at this time that all teachers, librarians included, act in loco parentis, in place of parents, when the students are in school. Can some of these actions be explained or excused because I'm acting in the place of parents? Sure. Could my decisions be described as cowardly? No doubt. I do make concessions, permitting some books to be read at tables, but not circulate. I wrestle with these issues daily, and I solicit teachers' feedback as much as I can when they stop by to retrieve their classes. As it is Sunday, and I'm recording this episode, I made sure to look at the New York Times book review. Reese Witherspoon was the subject of the Buy the Book interview this week, and she was asked about her audiobook recording of Harper Lee's Go Set a Watchman. I loved listening to this audiobook. My teenagers were reading To Kill a Mockingbird for a high school English class, and my own memories of this classic were so rusty that I listened to the audio version read by Sissy Spacek. I was lucky enough to secure both Mockingbird and Watchmen, and I listened to them in quick succession. Miss Spacek, who hails from Texas, and Miss Witherspoon, originally from Louisiana, gave unforgettable performances, and I devoured these books in a matter of days. I would like to thank you for listening today. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Share this podcast with other school librarians in your district and perhaps your PLN. Consider leaving a ratings on iTunes as it helps other school librarians learn about this podcast. I would like to thank composer Nazar Ryback at hooksounds.com for the music you've heard today. And as always, I invite your feedback and your contributions. Please email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. The topic of our next episode will be Book Snob, Guilty as Charged. I hope you will tune in.